Hey knitters, welcome back to Rena Knits. Are you now thinking of traveling again? How about going on an airplane? If yes, do you want to take your knitting with you? The biggest question, can you actually take your knitting in your handbag when you're traveling on an airplane? That's the question we're going to be answering today. Now that traveling has started up again, when you're traveling, you want to be able to take something with you to do during the evenings when you might have a little bit of a break, or if you're traveling from one city to another and you have to drive a long distance, and let's say your spouse or your partner is driving, then you could do something, keeping your hands busy. I usually like to take my knitting with me as well. Now, we've been doing a lot of driving distance trips, so I could just take my knitting that way and I don't have to worry about it. But now that we could start going on an airplane and start going longer distance away, that's when you start questioning, do I have to check in my knitting, or can I actually knit on an airplane? What do you think? Write down in the comment section if you think you could take your knitting with you, and keep watching this video for more details. Depending on where you live in the world, the answer is yes and no. Now, if you live in the United States, the answer is yes. You could take your knitting with you. But there are certain conditions. Knitting needles, needlepoint tools, and scissors less than 4 inches long can go on an airplane in your carry-on bag. However, anything that has a blade on it, like any sort of cutting tools, they have to be checked in. Now, in Australia and in the UK, blunt needles and scissors that are less than 2.5 inches are allowed, but there's a big but here. It depends on the security clearance personnel that you get. Now, if they think that it's a pass, it's a pass. But if they think it needs to be checked in or needs to be returned to your house, then you'd have to follow those rules. So just as a rule to go by, so that way you don't get surprised when you get on an airplane, actually check the airline that you're going on, their rules and regulations about knitting essentials and what you're allowed to take and what you're not allowed to take, and follow through on that one. Now, there are a few things that you could do to make things easier for yourself when you're going on an airplane, for the people you're sitting beside when you're going on an airplane, and for security. One, pick a very small project. So don't take that big blanket that you're working on or that big scarf that you're working on. Maybe take a smaller one, that like a little hat that you're working on, or baby outfit that you're working on. And that way you have it only covering your particular space and not going into other people's space. It makes it easier that way. Another good advice is take circular needles rather than two separate straight needles. With the circular needles, you don't have to worry about losing your stitches in all the hustle of security and taking it out of your luggage and all that bit. With the two straight needles, when you're knitting, depending on how long it is, it might go on the other person who you're sitting beside's space, or it might even hit them. So you want to try to avoid that. So circular needles, everything is still confined in your space. The other thing you could do is try plastic or bamboo needles. That way, one, it could pass security and the metal detector quite easily. And there's something about plastic and wood that's not threatening. So that's one other option that you could try. You also might want to stick to smaller size needles, simply because they look, and the perception is that they're less threatening. And the other thing is that you want to stick to blunt objects. So there's needles that you can find that are a lot more pointier, a lot more kind of like pin-like, but then there are needles that are a lot more rounder and they're less blunt. So you might want to stick to blunt needles to avoid the perception of a threat. Knitting needles that don't look sharp and scissors that are also blunt will pass through security a lot more easily than objects that actually look like they could hurt someone. 2 tips that might help as well. One is to bring a self-addressed envelope with a stamp that can fit your needles in. So just in case the security people say that this is not allowed, and you've already checked in your other luggage, so you have to actually return this back. You don't want it thrown away. So you could actually mail it back to yourself. So that's one way to save it. And second, a stitch holder. A big enough stitch holder that you could put all your stitches on, so that way you don't lose any of your stitches, or you could then quickly put them back on your needles to work on them. So this will help with the luggage. This will help save your knitting, and if you don't want to carry it all along, you could just stick it into your checked baggage or stick it in your luggage without worrying about losing any stitches or having any of your work undone. These were some tips and ideas on how to take your knitting with you on an airplane when you're starting to travel again. Now, checking in with the rules at your airport as well as your carrier usually will help you a lot. And just remembering to take blunt stuff as well as smaller projects makes it a lot easier for everyone. More information about the different rules as well as some tips on how to take your knitting with you on an airplane can be found in the description. And there's also a PDF that you could download. If you like this video, don't forget to click that like button. And if you're new, welcome. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button to get the latest videos on knitting projects, knitting ideas, knitting patterns, and much more. Relax, enjoy, and keep knitting.